Okay, so successful students or successful schools start with successful students. Why should we provide AIM? Well, research indicates that high school students with learning disabilities, reading comprehension increased when exposed to digital text with text-to-speech capabilities and other enhanced features. So this was part of the Journal of Learning Disabilities, 1995. That's how long we've been pushing this. There was a research study done in Kentucky where the entire state of Kentucky, and this was probably 8 to 10 years ago, the entire state implemented text-to-speech program on all of their computers. All students, all teachers, everyone had access to it. And they started tracking the data, and within 1 quarter, there were students that were increasing their reading scores by over 2 grade levels in 1 quarter, just by providing them with the text-to-speech capabilities. So back to our IEP scores here in Alaska. If all of our students that needed AIM had access to those accessible educational materials, I really would love to know what this number, this 78% below basic, would be then. So state testing scores can only increase in the area of reading if students are provided with materials that fit their educational needs. Okay, so there are 5 basic sources to receive accessible educational materials. The first one is called the National Instructional Materials Access Center. It's NIMAC. And it's a huge repository that all publishers after 2005, all textbook publishers for K through 12 after 2005 were mandated to provide the NIMAC with their accessible source for those textbooks. The NIMAC, which is this, again, this huge national repository of all textbooks, then they're kind of the gatekeepers that say, okay, we're only going to allow certain entities or certain people within each state access to that repository, to that database, to download those books. ATLA is one of them. Anchorage School District has their own access to that repository, and Fairbanks School District has it. All of the other 54 school districts go through us to get that. And so the way the process kind of works is a special ed teacher will call me and they'll say, I have a student, documented dyslexia, we need these 5 textbooks. And so they will give me the ISBN number off of those textbooks. They tell me what format they need the textbook in, and then they also have to provide me with the IEP. Then I'm able to download that accessible format and send it to them. I make that sound like it's a really simple process, but it does take a while. And then the next level is becoming an accessible media producer, or an AMP. And again, that's the same thing. That's ATLA, Fairbanks School District, and Anchorage School District are accessible media producers, or AMPs. And then the third way is commercial sources, your Amazon, however you're able to get it. And then the fourth way is free resources, and there are tons of them out there. And then the last way is just to create it on your own, which is tedious. Very, very tedious to create it on your own. So here are a few options that are also AMPs. there are different ways to locate those accessible materials. Bookshare, I would say, would be your #1 most commonly used resource for those. And so if you go to bookshare.org, the student does have to qualify to receive books under bookshare.org. However, it's free for them to do that. And so then you can also, it's free as long as they do it under the school, or you can purchase an individual membership. You type in the ISBN number, and that digital version, an accessible digital version, you can download of the textbook, and they're able to read it. So Bookshare has, I want to say somewhere between 250 to 300,000 books in their repository. Then another organization is called Learning Ally, and the difference between Bookshare and Learning Ally is 2 things. Bookshare, you're going to get your textbooks, your periodicals, your journals. They also have regular books like Harry Potter in there, but you have to use a piece of technology that will read that to you. So it is a digitized voice. They are getting much better than they used to be, but it's still a digital voice. It's a robot kind of voice that will read it to you. Whereas with Learning Ally, all the books are human read. So they have hundreds of volunteers around the nation that read books, and they put them in an accessible format on Learning Ally. So with both of those, your students need to qualify under the Chafee Act as having an organic print disability. Same thing with NIMAC. How much does Learning Ally cost? I can look it up really quick. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. And they keep changing. I know that if the school is a member of Learning Ally, the student's able to receive the books for free. APH is for blind and low vision. NIMAC I talked about. And then there's a website called projectgutenberg.org. And on Project Gutenberg, you can get outdated, I guess they're out of circulation, they're out of copyright books, and they're free. You can just go on there right now and download them in several different formats. So they'll show on their site what type of format they have them in. And they're great if a student is reading Romeo and Juliet. Not so great site if they're reading Harry Potter books. Okay. So again, that NIMAC, it's a national repository for NIMUS, which is the national text to voice. You'd have to have a device to do the text to voice on Gutenberg. You'd have to use either an online voice to text or text to speech tool, or something within your iPad to do that. Okay, on NIMAC, it's a national repository for those NIMUS source files provided by the publisher. Only students that are dual qualified under IDEA and copyright law are eligible to receive files from NIMAC. And students have to be, it has to be certified by a competent authority who have print disabilities. And again, the word print disabilities and the word competent authority are controversial. Some states have defined print disabilities, and some states have defined who a competent authority is. Our state has not. So here at ATLA, when we're talking about accessible educational materials, if we can't get a doctor to sign off, whether it's the therapist, the school speech pathologist, whoever falls underneath a competent authority to sign off that the student has print disabilities. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't get accessible educational materials. It just means we can't go through the NIMAC to get them. So when we talk about print disability, it's a term that refers to individuals who are unable to read or use standard print materials because of an organic dysfunction. That organic dysfunction comes back and haunts us several times. So how do you know if your student's reading disability has an organic cause? They define it as organic cause of reading problems include those related to a dysfunction of the neural pathways required for reading, fluent reading. Those are pathways that involve brain structure. An example of an organic cause might include dyslexia and related learning disorders. A non-organic cause of reading problems includes anything unrelated to those neural pathways. And so some examples of those would be poor lack of instruction, limited English proficiency, poor attendance, oppositional defiant disorder, and other behavioral disorders. The following group of students are not automatically included or excluded as having reading disabilities of an organic cause: learning disabilities, dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, chronic fatigue, and autism. So, in a nutshell, what that means is we have to read the IEP. I have to read some, the reports, may have to get a doctor involved to sign off and say, yes, it's an organic disability or a reading disability that has an organic cause. So our competent authority includes doctors of medicine, optometrists, nurses, therapists, social workers, caseworkers, counselors, rehab teachers, and superintendents. In my experience, the majority of the time, we do have something from a doctor, something from a caseworker, a counselor, a superintendent, somebody that will sign off and say, yes, I'm competent authority and this student does have a print disability. So APH, it's only for blind and visually impaired. It serves early intervention, preschool, elementary, and secondary. Produces materials in digital and hard copy, braille, large print, and digital files for e-readers. So if someone calls us and they say, I have a student that's visually impaired, I need books, we would, depending on what documentation we already have, we would start going through the line and start with the NIMAC and then go down to APH next. So Bookshare, like I said, this is probably one of the most commonly used. It's for all ages who meet that copyright criteria. There are memberships for organizations and individuals, but it's free to qualifying students, and they produce all of their books in multiple formats. So this is how they consider eligible students. Disability is visual impairment, blindness. They're qualified if confirmed by that competent authority, which they say is a family doctor, ophthalmologist, optometrist, teacher of the visually impaired. A special education teacher is also considered a competent authority. Or they have certification from the National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped in the U.S. or similar national body. If they have physical disabilities, they're qualified again if confirmed by a competent authority that the disability significantly affects the use of printed materials. So that can be a family doctor, medical professionals, physical therapist, resource specialist, or SPED teacher. LD and reading are reading disability. They're qualified if confirmed by those competent authorities. That can be a neurologist, psychiatrist, learning disability specialist, special ed teacher, school psychologist, clinical psychologist, or a clinical psychologist with a background in learning disabilities. So autism, emotional disabilities, ADHD are not qualified under the diagnosis. However, I do want to put out this caveat to that. I have been able to get students that have autism and ADHD accessible materials through Bookshare because along with the ADHD, we found out that they did have a reading disability. Or with the autism, especially high-functioning autism, it's pretty easy sometimes to figure out, yes, they do have a reading disability.